Good evening, Kalamazoo. I'm your host, Nick Schneider, coming at you live from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. 4.9 million barrels of oil have spilled into the Gulf of Mexico, resulting from the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig. The oil spill had numerous catastrophic repercussions for local wildlife, the oil rig workers, the economies of the 5 Gulf states, and BP. The true consequences are all still coming to light as new data emerges about the horrific environmental effects of the spill. Numerous reports of marine and wildlife mortality rising shows the impact the oil spill has on contaminating the Gulf of Mexico water. The cement seal at the bottom of the borehole wasn't entirely sealed, which led to a chain reaction of safety failures, resulting in the death of 11 people. Local economies of the 5 Gulf states were all also strongly impacted by the spill. Lastly, BP faced severe legal penalties, paying billions of dollars to a number of affected parties. Sending it off to environmental expert Corey Gensterblum for a further analysis of the environmental impacts.
Thank you, Nick, for the warm introduction. So, as you guys can imagine, this catastrophic event had massive impacts on the wildlife, especially in the Gulf region. So, as we see here, one of the most impacted animals in this oil spill is sea turtles. It's estimated that over 6,000 deaths to sea turtles have happened because of this oil spill. And this number is only rising by the day, which is sad. BP has really assisted in cleanup efforts, but this just totally destroyed their ecosystems, and many sea turtles are dying because of it. Additionally, birds. There are a lot of bird deaths because of this oil spill. It is estimated that over 82,000 bird deaths have been caused because of this, catastrophic failure. Additionally, marine mammals such as whales and dolphins, all those cute mammals we love, and we all love dolphins. They're all sad and they're all dying as well. There have been estimated over 30,000 deaths and many more to come. Sad day in the Gulf of Mexico. Back to you, Nick.
Wow, Corey, that is incredibly sad. Now let's send it off to Steve Davis for a legal analysis of the oil spill.
Thank you, Nick, for that introduction. Before diving into any of the legal analysis, I'd like to take a moment to actually explain what happened on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig. So it was a series of 8 catastrophic failures that led to the eventual destruction of an explosion of the oil rig. So these include dodgy cement at the drill's base, a pressure test misinterpretation, a leak not spotted soon enough, 2 valve failures, an overwhelmed mud and gas separator, a gas alarm failure, and no battery for the blowout prevention system. So these were the catastrophic failures that, in result, led to the destruction of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig and led to the death of 11 workers. So essentially, this was taken to court, of course, and the judge appointed with the criminal charges ruled that BP acted with gross negligence in the disaster, and in 2013, BP pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The company, as a result, agreed to pay a record $4 billion in criminal fines and penalties to cover civil awards and settlements. So diving into the company more deeply and looking at executives that were charged or found not guilty of the charges, the Department of Justice criminal investigation resulted in charges against 4 BP employees. So a jury acquitted BP rig supervisor Robert Kaluza of a misdemeanor pollution charge. Another rig supervisor, Donald Vidrin, pleaded guilty to the same misdemeanor pollution charge after federal prosecutors abandoned more serious manslaughter charges against both him and Kaluza. Former BP executive David Rainey was acquitted of charges that he manipulated spill-related calculations regarding the safety of drilling operations. And lastly, former BP engineer Kurt Mix was convicted of obstruction of justice, for deleting a string of text messages. Shortly ensuing his conviction, a judge ordered a new trial amid allegations of juror misconduct, and Mix ultimately pleaded guilty to a less serious charge and was sentenced to 6 months of probation. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks for that legal analysis, Steve. Now we're going to talk about some economic impacts. The Gulf Coast economies of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida were all affected by the BP oil spill, as was Texas, but to a much lesser extent. Pollution, a negative externality, affected each state. Over 10 million pounds of oil residue was collected in the Gulf states. Here we have a graph illustrating the cost of the negative externality of the oil spill. We have the cost of the firm here and the cost of society here. This is the socially optimal point where the equilibrium price and quantity are reached. But when the oil spill happens, the quantity of oil increases, resulting in the deadweight loss to society, creating social inefficiency.
And as we've discussed prior, we all know this oil spill greatly had just a massively terrible impact on the wildlife in the region. And this affected animals such as whales, dolphins, your tuna, in your fishing industry, if anything. There was a net loss of $700 million in the fishing industry, in tourism. But if we could take one positive from the situation, it is that the economies of the Gulf states was actually stimulated by BP, because BP invested $6 billion in the cleanup. And this $6 billion it more than covered the $700 million in losses. Over to you, Steve.
Wow. So a lot of information from a lot of key experts in their fields. We heard about the legal consequences, the economic consequences, and then the consequences to wildlife in the area. So like Corey mentioned, hundreds of thousands of wildlife from the Gulf Coast area were killed as a result of the oil rig explosion. So ecosystems affected in the Gulf and along the shores, so in the actual water and along the shorelines, those ecosystems were impacted from the 5 million barrels of oil spilled into the water. We talked about the 8 catastrophic failures that led to the death of 11 oil rig workers on the Deepwater Horizon oil rig. Also discussed the economic impacts, both positive and negative, to the region. Then lastly, the billions of dollars of damages paid by BP to the various parties. So thank you all for listening. I hope that wraps it up well and gives you all just an overview and some insight into the actual event. This is Steve Davis.
And I'm Nick Schneider for Channel 7 News, signing off.